Now, crucially, what made him godlike in that era, made Nip unbeatable, was that since he was the second best player of that period of time overall, until Shocks came around and got godlike at the end of the year, since overall he was second best, and he was playing on a team with the best player, that meant that he now wasn't even the main star, he was the second star. So if your second star is better than every other team's main star, you can see why Nip was so dominant. These two players, they really did carry nearly every single time. Like every single time Dignitas used to get smashed by Nip in those semis or big games. Go back and watch. And it was always G.O.A.T and f0rest just dropping 20, 25, 30 on like Nuke Reckonem on Inferno. Like that was the whole reason these other teams couldn't beat them, because they had a good strategy and they had good synergy and good team play and they had the right approach and they'd play all the maps. All these factors helped Nip be successful. But having this godlike 1-2 punch who would either take turns, or if they both came at the same time, they were just unbeatable. This is what made Nip unbeatable. So that's the crucial thing. He was the greatest second star. That was the best role that he was in. And that was why Nip was so good. Beyond that, beyond having the best player, they had the best stars and the best star combo, because they had G.O.A.T and they had f0rest. Now in the early days, we're talking about not the full 7-month span, but for about the first, let's say the first 4 or 5 months of that 7-month span, f0rest was right up there as well. He was the second best player in the world, and he was having crazy, dropping mad frag totals, and he had very sick aim. He had one of the sickest aims in the game, and because he's on the entry side of the equation, you had one of the best entry fraggers in the world. I mean, admittedly second entry after Freiburg, who's just wrecking sites, opening them, bodying people in the head with sick aim. Then you've got G.O.A.T coming behind, who's so good at clutches. This combo here won so many games for an IP, and they were just unbeatable pretty much. Their skill would win the mad CT rat sides, and then with this sort of a setup on T side, they were just bodying teams even on T side, when at the time CSGO was a very CT-sided game. So they're the best player, they're the best stars, the best star combo as well, that actually had a dual effect in the game. It's not as if one's playing well, it counteracts the other one. Even the way they affected the game could work it, both could work and have their impact on a single round because of the different ends of the round they're beyond. But you know what? f0rest is a godlike player, yeah? In fact, without Neo, we would say f0rest clearly the best player of all time. And in fact, probably the best player most of these years. And what's even in the discussion, whoever's next closest, people would go, oh, that's not really comparable, right? It's the same thing with Nico, right? The last, over 2016 and 2017, if coldzera isn't there, Nico's hands down the best player. Nico's the best player, especially once he gets to phase, where people will be saying he's the best player in the world. It wouldn't matter that he might not have always done as well in some of the finals. By the way, he would have won most of these finals in a world where coldzera doesn't exist, remember? It's SK who's playing in like half of them. Then you consider they're both Neo and Nico, both Nico and f0rest have the same exact problem in finals. They're not as spectacular. Now, they're not shit. They're not all choking all on. That's a ridiculous mischaracterization. But they're not as good as they are elsewhere. They're not that dominant player that they often are on other occasions. They have the odd final where they go super ham, but mostly in the final, yet something seems to get to them. A little bit of pressure or something about they don't have the same internal confidence to make the same kind of plays and hit their ceiling as often, whatever it might be. This is the funny thing, is that f0rest gets away with it. No one brings this up. No one counts that against him in this competition, except me, apparently. And what's funny is, both of them have the same problem. If you put Neo in a final against f0rest, I'll put all my money on Neo. I know Neo's team also has to win the game for him, but Neo will outperform f0rest in all the majors he plays against him in. I've seen it happen. Likewise, who's going to outperform Nico in all the finals he plays? Well, coldzera's your only sure bet. The other ones, it's a lot more touch and go. It depends on Nico on that day, or if the other person has an amazing game. But if you put coldzera, yeah, coldzera probably is going to outperform Nico in most of the finals he plays. He's got a different type of a game, and yet, whereas people go, that means coldzera is by far better, and it's not even really that close as to whether Nico is. People have no problem considering f0rest could be better than Neo, and could be as good as Neo, could be a greater player, could actually have qualities that make him better. I think a lot of people take when I say he's a GOAT candidate in 1.6 and go, right, well, since I like him, I can just say he was the GOAT at 1.6, so we've got that nailed down. He was the GOAT there, and so if he was a GOAT here, and he's been very good in CSGO, no one else has, so isn't he kind of the best? The problem with that is, personally, I don't think f0rest was the GOAT of 1.6. I've never had him as the GOAT of 1.6, and that's an issue for me. But move on to the second part of CSGO, and it becomes even more of an issue, because, again, if f0rest had been a GOAT candidate in CSGO, I'd at least understand it. But f0rest was a player who was very good for about maximum, let's say, the first year and a half. I'd say even a bit less than that if you want to talk about someone who's a contender for best player in the world. And during that time, he wasn't even the best player on NIP. Ninjas in pajamas. The best player at the time was G.O.A.T. He's the one who won the MVPs. He's the one who had the better stats. He's the one who the eye test told you was the best player in the team. He's the one actually who, if you go back into the end of 1.6, was really carrying the load, doing the hard yards for f0rest at the end of 1.6. f0rest was a godlike player from like 2006 to 2009, but you go like 2010 to the part in 2012, almost near the middle, where they stopped playing 1.6. Actually, G.O.A.T was the better player over that stretch of time than f0rest was over the last 2.5 years. The problem is this: if I go anywhere in CSGO, he's never going to be the GOAT. In fact, if I go anywhere beyond 2013, he's not even going to be like a top 5, top 10 player in the world. Like, he's not even going to be close to the GOAT. So already it's going to seem weird. Like, I thought you said this guy was the GOAT. Why is he not the GOAT in one of the games that you're counting as part of him being the GOAT? That seems kind of weird, right? Doesn't make sense, does it? And then I personally don't have him as the GOAT 1.6. So if we go back to 1.6, his best game, the game where he had his peak as a player, I personally would say 2007. If we go and look at that, he's not the GOAT there either. Like, for me, Neo's the GOAT. I've explained it all in that article below. I go pretty in-depth on why. So again, even in 1.6, he wouldn't be the GOAT at that moment in time. I wouldn't be watching him if I was watching the GOAT in that moment. I'd be watching Neo, or I'd be watching Potty before then. Or if I'm CSGO, I'd be watching Get-Right, or Shox, or Kenny S, or Olofmeister, or Cold Zero, or Simple. Like, I wouldn't ever be watching f0rest. It doesn't exist. This term is just a concept. It's just a meta concept. And now, that's not the same as people go, well, technically any top player's concept. No, the point is, I can say Neo was the GOAT, and I can go back and I can see the GOAT play. You can't do that with f0rest. It doesn't work. And this is why it doesn't make sense. Because, let's be real. Personally, I didn't have him as the GOAT. So for me, the idea is, if you weren't the GOAT, even for 1 second in your career, how could you be the GOAT for your whole career and for all versions of Counter-Strike? Primarily just due to longevity. Like, was f0rest better than Neo in 1.6? No, but Neo wasn't good enough in CSGO, and therefore suddenly f0rest now collectively gets to be the GOAT also for 1.6 combined with CSGO. Does that really work? I don't really know if that does. I mean, the amount of years and the number of different games you've dominated in seem like kind of a bit whack criteria to pick who the GOAT is. Like, again, if you can't look at them in the game and the eye test and all the other factors show you they're the GOAT, are they the GOAT? I mean, haven't you really just sort of created an award only f0rest almost qualifies for, and then had him win the award practically by default? But then, as I said, when you attempt to put any kind of tangible, meaningful context around it or apply it to a moment, it can't be pinned down. It's this elusive, ephemeral concept of a GOAT that can never be nailed down in a way that, as I showed you, in all those sports and all those other versions of Counter-Strike, you could nail someone down as the best. You could go there, you could watch them, you could say, this is the moment when he's in his prime. This is when this is the greatest player ever. I personally think Neo was the better player, though, and one factor is that f0rest at the majors had similar problems to what I've just shown you about Shox. Now, I don't have the stats to show you his individual performance, but I saw all the games, and when I described some of the context of these games for his team and the people they were playing, you might be pretty surprised and kind of underwhelmed that was such a great player, especially because he came from Sweden, a country that had most of the great teams of all time compared to any other country, and routinely produced major winners, and people won many, many championships and were team of the year type squads. So first things first, in 1.6, f0rest played in 7 major finals, and he was never an underdog in a single one of those major finals. So if you're not ever an underdog, you get to play 7 major finals. As a great player, 7's already a great number. As a truly great player, as long as you don't have a simple type scenario where you play amazingly, but everyone else shits the bed, which isn't what happened in these finals. f0rest very rarely was ever the guy carrying the final. You're expecting out of 7, I'm never the underdog. Like, I've got to get at least like 4. I've got to get at least over half. Let's say 5. If I can get to 6, I did awesome. Here's the stats for you. f0rest won 3 out of the 7. The 2 that he was a big favourite in, he lost. The 3 that he was a slight favourite in, he won 2 of. And then he had 2 that were a 50-50 coin flip, my judgment, and he won 1 of those. Now, the reason why this is shocking is because his rival for greatest 1.6 player of all time is, of course, Neo, the legendary Polish player. Poland, a country that produced 0 major winning squads except the ones that Neo played in. They didn't even have squads that could make top 4 at a major, never mind win one. And not only that, but Neo played in more major finals than f0rest did, and won a lot more than f0rest did. And f0rest played with way more talent That's ridiculous. Now, if you look at the rest of f0rest's career, he won way more prize money than Neo. He had a lot more top 3s and top 4s than Neo. He had a lot more consistency in terms of number of good and top years than some other players out there. Probably most players in history. I'd say Neo's his only real candidate in that regard. But at the majors, he wasn't able to get it done at the same superstar level that made all those amazing frag movie clips that we all love and enjoy.
One thing I've always thought is kind of bullshit is when people take the fragging and it's like, listen, they can say it, like I said, or can't. Maybe it makes it easier to call a strike if you've got f0rest. But the part I feel like is really misunderstood is a lot of fans think the superstar players understand the game like the in-game leaders. And so one thing they might be naive about, right, is they might think if you have f0rest and G.O.A.T with a very defined playing style, they just kind of do their thing and then you call around it. Like, whereas I wanted to ask you this, right? I know that, for example, I know it might sound shocking because he's a really cool guy on camera. G.O.A.T can be a bit of a whiner sometimes. He can definitely bait a bit sometimes. I've heard teammates say that. f0rest can sometimes be a bit lackluster on his sort of a kick up the arse, or in fact, quite frankly, he'll even say it. He never tries to think like an IGL and watch the demo. He wants you to tell him where to go. How do you use superstar players that is to get the most out of them, do you think?
I think the trickiest part about having superstars is like sometimes they're going to have their off days, or sometimes you're going to have to change stuff, and changing how a superstar is used to play the game is really hard. Like getting them to learn new stuff, it just doesn't work. I think it's really hard to do that. I think that's probably the biggest weakness.
Like, this might shock fans, f0rest, but on the one hand, part of me feels like you said earlier, you're a confident guy. You do think you're the greatest. You do think you were the best in 1.6, or maybe when you were playing you did. But this might shock a fan, but you yourself have told me there's times you think maybe Neo was the greatest, right?
Yeah, I've said it in interviews as well, that I think he might come out on top of this one, actually. I think he was a very, very complete player in 1.6, and I've never, as we stated earlier, I've never seen myself like when I'm playing. Yes, I consider myself the best, but outside of the game, I see myself as a nobody still, or at that time a nobody. Well, how can I compete with this guy? Like Neo, what, are you kidding me? How can I get close to this guy? But yeah, I think Neo, he had a longer career in 1.6 than I did. Not that career, like the longevity is always what to go by, but he was successful way earlier in 1.6, and he kept that onwards. It was not like he was super good in the beginning and then kind of fell down. He just kept on getting better and better and better and better. That was the thing that was scary with him. I was definitely up there competing with him. There were a lot of players who were really good, but I think definitely me and Neo stood out a bit. But I think I give him that share as well. I think it's also really nice. Like as you said, it's a discussion. Some people haven't seen the whole of Neo's career. People maybe only watched my games. Didn't really, because it was hard to keep track of everything.
Sure.
As you said, if you wanted to follow everything, you had to download every single specific demo. You had to watch those demos. It's not as accessible as it is now to look up things. It was kind of like the real super hard to really go by. So if people were following Swedish Counter-Strike, yeah, they would consider me the best. Or if people were fans of Fnatic, yeah, we're the best. But I mean, if we would look at the whole picture, perhaps Neo do come out on top, yeah.
Because for me, the following years, so the couple of years before G.O.A.T and Gox and the big super team came in, this is the era. Man. Yeah, it was. Listen, it was all up and down because it was a very, I would say it's probably the most competitive era of CS, because at the same time, like, you had all these amazing top teams from all over the world. Like, obviously, this is when we had like Denmark and fucking Poland, and Germany has a great team back then. This is a real tough era. And also, the circuit used to be enormous. You could go the whole world, China, Korea, South America. It could go everywhere. It's an enormous circuit. So in this era, I remember this was really when individually you made your name. Like, these were the years when everyone remembers you maybe at your peak.
Yeah, I think 2006 was one of the best years. I won one of the few awards back in 1.6. I won the best esports player of the year, 2006 as a game show. I don't even remember. I think it was in Cologne, or perhaps I don't know. But 2006, 2007 also was a good year. Not that I remember 2007 as being a bad year. For Fnatic, I remember us being.
Here's the thing: it started with the Poles beating you in a bunch of tournaments because they won like the first couple of majors. But at the end of the year, you guys were winning everything. It was when you like late on in the year, you were winning like all those IEMs in America, and you went on like a little streak. You were like number one for like, you won like one of those ones in Korea, one of those like
I can't remember what they called them,
Yeah,
stars or whatever, one of those things. You know, you had like a
Oh,
streak towards the end of the year when you were like the number one team.
Oh,
Maybe you're just remembering, unfortunately, losing the majors. If you lose a major, it's going to be in your mind, isn't it? You know?
yeah. I think perhaps that is the case here.
Oh, yeah? You and whose army? Well, how about the Skrilluminati for one? They're the people who support my content. This video was kindly supported by The Concept, Matt, Pugnatio, Rajcula, Toucan, Jensen Goh, Tosh, Jason, Bane Diesel, Animosity, and you know it, everyone does. A special thanks goes out to my main man, Jerky's Minion, for the long-term support. Do you want to ask a question for my AMA videos? Would you like teasers? Find out what upcoming guests I've got? You want to suggest a topic or a guest? Maybe you want to be part of one of those 1 hour lengthy online discussions I do where the topics are set by you. Well, if any of these perks or more tickle your fancy, I think you know what to do by now. Put your money where your mouth is and join the Skrilluminati, where Patreon link in the description below.